being on the streets of Columbus has made me fall in love with the city in a way that I never really appreciated when I had a place and when I was sort of cloistered in my young professional bubble in my swanky apartments. I've gotten to meet people here, some wonderful people who haven't stolen from me, who've actually been incredibly kind people. Some of whom are on the streets also, and some of whom aren't. And one of the fun, yeah, I guess that's kind of the best part of being on the streets of Columbus here is just a variety of people I've gotten to meet and get to know, and along with the various organizations and nonprofits that I've sort of, that have sort of helped me, and yeah, and one sort of one I guess one I guess institution that I've really gotten to know, one aspect of my life that I've really gotten to enrich in this experience has been my religious faith. Now, the question of the subject of religion for me is kind of a dicey one because I still don't like really ascribe to being a Christian per se, and I know it's kind of in a way a little bit blasphemous to say something like that after Easter when we're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus. But I will say a lot of the lessons, a lot of the scripture, and a lot of the Bible verses that I've really gotten to acquaint myself with over this past time, through several churches, mind you, through several of the churches that I've had the opportunity to go to their service, and be kind of acquainted from. I've met some really awesome people, and I feel in a way closer to God than I ever have in the past. And even though I don't really believe, I guess literally, in a lot of the Jesus stuff, I do admire Jesus for what I'm told, for the deeds that I'm told that he's done, and for sort of the overall humility that he represents. And I relate a lot to it, honestly. And I'm not trying to I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm comparing myself to Jesus, which is not at all what I'm trying to do. But I relate a lot to I admire, and I relate a little bit to the notion of Jesus. Oh, I see you, Gary. I'm glad you popped in. Nice to see you, hon. Always nice to see an old friend from Montreal. Take care, Gary. But yeah, I have to say I admire a lot of the positive teachings that come out of that I've really seen coming out of these churches and stuff. And of course, there's always, I always have to kind of filter out some of the more Bible thumping, judgmental, I guess, tendencies of some churches. But when I'm able to do that, I'm really able to find a lot of value in going to church. And I still haven't been the greatest with regularly attending services and stuff, but I've definitely been a lot more active than I have in the past. If nothing else, for a free meal every week or so. And I do have to do, I might as well do a shout out to a couple of churches here in Columbus that I've kind of gotten to be involved with, in a little bit. Two churches, namely, actually I should say three. One of which is in my kind of old stomping grounds of Old Town East. It's called the Shiloh Christian Center. I have not attended their service yet. However, it is a church whose people, which I've really gotten close to some of the volunteers, and it almost honestly there's nights where I go to this church for their meals, not even for the food, but just kind of for the family, the kind of the feel. It's kind of like seeing your family, or kind of like seeing your posse every week. I've really gotten to know some of the volunteers, and I honestly adore some of the individuals that take time out of their day to volunteer at this church almost on a weekly basis, or on a daily basis. And so that one, the Shiloh Christian Center, what is one in my very own neighborhood of an Old Town East that if I walked by every day and never really gotten to know until last year and a half. The second church I kind of want to recognize is the Short North Church, particularly for Pastor Amy, and just the uplifting and just some of her sermons have always been really uplifting to me. And also they're and I find the church quite progressive. One of the things that I really loved about, I think about a month ago during International Women's Month was Pastor Amy talking about Mary and some of the teachings about Mary. The mother, I think that's Jesus' mother or something like that. I probably should, that's probably an obvious thing, but Mary was kind of a figure that I think throughout the Bible, which I sort of have said in past entries, the Bible's a man-made book, right? King James and friends, right? And so it's easy to imagine during that time, during the biblical ages, within the patriarchy of even the modern Catholic Church, that even Mary was somebody that was overlooked and sort of shunned, or maybe not shunned, but she was definitely not taken seriously. And it reminds me a lot of how my mother was treated by people, and even by myself. And I'm guilty of this myself, of overlooking women, especially women who might be struggling with trying to adapt to a new place, like my mother. And I feel like I'm almost I feel like right now I'm almost kind of recapitulating a lot of my previous posts that I've made, that I've been kind of reflecting on as I've sort of archiving my old videos on that Open Mic Live series, which is linked below. But I was, as I was reflecting on my mother, some of the things that I look back on with regret is sort of dominated by the overall condescension that I held for her. Even if I wasn't quite aware of it as a kid, it was definitely there. It definitely manifested itself through me and unto me from other people like my father, and from other people that would sort of underestimate my mother. And every time I talk to my mother, and every time I sort of reflect on her, I'm sort of I sort of managed to discover something new about my mother that I did not take the time to appreciate in the past. And it just really makes me miss her even that much more so, and it makes me just admire the woman that much more. And that's something I really I've tried to work on for myself, is kind of getting rid of that, is trying to flush out a lot of the biases and some of the disrespect that I think I used to have towards women, that I think came from perhaps growing up in kind of a I don't know, in an old school kind of patriarchal place. I don't know. It's definitely something that for me is something I need to constantly work on. And that's not to say that there aren't, obviously I've worked in companies, and I've been under the leadership of several wonderful, strong women in the past. But I feel like in those cases, these individual women were always kind of, I don't know. It would be nice. It would be nice for those types of qualities, and for that level of admiration to just be the default, as opposed to like this notion that women have to work extra hard to gain one's respect. As opposed to just some douchebag man going up on getting up there and just automatically having the entitlements and the privilege of being a man, basically attached to his resume. So that's something I want to kind of, I guess, I don't know. That's something that I think is worth noting, and that to kind of come back to all that, to kind of just to kind of spill some praise for the Short North Church and Pastor Amy for kind of being that, for kind of espousing a progressive and empowering version of Christianity that I think would serve well to be, that I'd like to see more of. And and I am seeing more of that. I mean, I'm very, and for all of the negativity in today's politics, I'm inspired by what I see in the church, at least the churches that I have sort of witnessed and have been part of. So many churches in Columbus, at least, are nowadays, they are gay friendly. In fact, it seems like it's almost the default nowadays for most of the churches I've seen in Columbus to be accepting of queer people, and it's nice to see that becoming normalized. And it's really easy to forget. I think that it wasn't that long ago that church was seen as the enemy of the queer community, and of course there's still a lot of sort of extreme cultish um, religious institutions out there that sort of use the Bible and use the Word of God to divide people and to espouse hatred. But it's nice to see, at least from my eyes, a sort of return back to the humility and back to the holiness. Back to the true definition of God, which is love. All right. And then the third church I want to just sort of recognize, one that I've gotten, also involved with recently, is the First English Lutheran Church on the east side of Columbus. And there I've gotten to know the pastor a little bit personally, and just and that was and I got to know the gentleman in charge of that church actually when I was in Camp Shameless about last summer, when I was camping with a group of other unhoused folks at a sort of and for like a week of frustration, and mind you, but I do want to recognize that church for basically being there when the city came in to evict us, and I in a weird sort of irony, that day that we were basically told to clear the lot ended up being the best day of my experience there at Camp Shameless, because the folks that showed up, like the volunteers from that church and from I think some of the nearby community groups who were there to sort of help us with the process of moving our stuff out, and not being harassed by the city. They were angels. And I mean, this was coming off of one of the worst weeks I had with having my laptop stolen and my phone stolen that time back in last August. And so they truly were angels. And sometimes all it takes is a box of Cinnamon Life cereal and a THC vape pen to bring bliss onto what was otherwise a terrible and kind of honestly a very kind of degrading experience. Not even the experience of the eviction, but the experience of having all my shit stolen at this camp and having nobody help me, having none of my neighbors or none of my other fellow campers like help me, and that's so often the case, like what I've learned being on the streets here, what I've learned about the unhoused community, and I think a reason why, I don't know, I guess almost by definition, the unhoused community is a very transient population. And so this notion of trying to organize unhoused folks into some sort of cohesive, like, unit, into some sort of, like, I guess into some sort of effective campaign, I'm realizing how hopeless that is, and how that sort of works against my own intuition and logic, because I mean, I'll just say it, like most unhoused folks just aren't interested in working together with each other. I mean, it's kind of sad that the cliche is true about most unhoused folks just are not capable of working together. When you get to that level of, I think when you get to a certain level of desperation and loss of hope, you just don't trust people anymore. And I've been there before myself. And I'm almost, and I had to really it took me about a month, even just from this recent like debacle of losing all my shit again. Every time that happens, I just, it just makes me hate everybody. It makes me hate the world. And I can imagine people, other unhoused folks that are maybe less privileged than I am, like that are maybe perhaps in a more prolonged state of of I guess of desperation. I don't know. It's easy to see how years of that can take a toll on you. And I somehow I can sit here 2 years or so after after losing my old place in Alexandria, and somehow I still wake up on most days with some hope and some optimism and some gumption to get through the day somehow. But it's hard sometimes, I have to admit. And I'm grateful for for the various, for those three religious organizations I just mentioned, and for a lot of the people who take the time um, to help to help serve meals, or to help cook meals, or to help, or just to kind of or just to kind of just be there as friends, to as friends and as confidants to us, to kind of basically just to kind of demonstrate that we're not alone,